What's up, dudes? Today we're going to solve problem 2 sent to us by dailycodingproblem.com. Off we go. Good morning. Here's your coding interview problem for today. This problem was asked by Uber. Given an array of integers, return a new array such that each element at index I of the new array is the product of all the numbers in the original array except the one at I. For example, if our input was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the expected output would be 120, 60, 40, 30, 24. If our input was 3, 2, 1, the expected output would be 2, 3, 6. Follow up. What if you can't use division? Let's read this carefully and make sure we understand what is being asked of us here. So we're given an array of integers. We need to return a new array, and each element in the new array at index I needs to be the product of all numbers from the original array except for the one at I. So in this example, let's say I equals 2, 0, 1, 2. We need to take the product of 5 times 4 times 2 times 1, which is 40, and store it at index 2 of the output array. So 0, 1, 2, that would be right here. So you can see it's 40. So we take 5 times 4 times 2 times 1. We exclude I. Now if we could use division, this would actually be pretty easy, because we could just take the product of all of these numbers and then divide that number by I, and that would give us the desired output at the ith position for the output array. Since we can't, that's really what makes this hard. Daily Coding Problem has deemed this as a hard problem, and that's really why. So how can we do this without division? Well, we could actually use two for loops, not nested. And in the first for loop, we would iterate from left to right, and we could take the product of everything to the left of I. Then in the second for loop, we can go from right to left, and we can take the product of everything to the right of I. Then we can multiply those two numbers together, and that will give us our desired output for I. So I'm sorry if that's a little confusing, but we're gonna talk through this a bunch of times. First, let's go ahead and write it out in note form. So initially, we'll just create our output array. Alright, next, let's create a variable that we'll use to store the output values. Alright, now we want to loop from left to right, so we'll loop from 0 to n. Alright, and we will take the product of everything from 0 to I minus 1. So the product of everything from 0 to I minus 1 from the input array. So in this case, I equals 2. When we're looking at 3 here, and we would take the product of 0 to I minus 1, which would be 1 times 2. And that's not how you spell product. Okay. And what we would actually do with that product is we would store it at the ith position of the output array. So we would take 1 times 2, and we would store it right here in the output array. Now that's just temporary. That will change in the second for loop. Okay, now we need to loop from right to left, so we're going to loop from n to 0. And we're going to do the opposite of this here. We're going to calculate the product of n to I plus 1 from the input array. And instead of storing that product at output at I, we're actually going to multiply that product by the existing value at output I, the existing value that was determined right here. All right. So let's go ahead and just start coding this out. I'm going to go through an iteration of this very slowly once we get to that point. And we'll do this from scratch. Give ourselves a constructor. And we'll give the solution its own method. And we need to return an array. So let's create the variables that we'll be using for this. We'll just call the input array input. And we'll just use 2, 3, 4, 5 as the test values for our initial call. And we're going to leave out 1 just because I think it's going to be a little easier to understand once I start walking through it. And in order to test this, we are just going to make a call to our solution method and see if it prints out what we expect it to print out. And in order to print out an array, we need to use this arrays2string method. So we'll call that, invoke our solution method, and we'll pass the input array to that. So I need to add that parameter here. Okay. I would always recommend typing up notes for yourself just like this. So in an interview, whenever you're trying to work out your solution, you should type notes for yourself like this. Make sure it's correct here, and then you can use this as a guide once you get to your solution and just follow this step by step. So the first thing we'll do is we will create our output array. And this needs to be the same length as our input. Now we need to create our value, or our variable, we're right here, that is going to be used to store the values for our output array. And we're going to set this equal to 1, and in a second I'm going to explain why that's necessary. So now we're looping from 0 to n. Alright, now we are going to take the product, we're going to calculate the product of everything from 0 to I minus 1 in the input array, and we're going to store that product at output I. So the first thing we're going to put here is we're going to go ahead and set the value for output at I to value. Alright. Value is 1, so why is this necessary? Well, let me just move these down here so that we can see it right next to our for loop. Alright, so recall that what we're doing is we're taking the product of everything to the left of I. Well, when I is 0, there's nothing to the left of that. So we need to set our output our first value in the output array to 1. That way, when we get to the next value, so when I is equal to 1, we'll be able to multiply this by 1 because we need this here simply to be 2. And the only way to have that is if you can take 2 times 1. So once we actually walk through an iteration, I think that's going to become more clear. And then remember, we're taking the product of all the numbers, so we need to set value equal to value times input at I. Next, we're going to iterate from n to 0. So first, let's just reset our value back to 1. And now we need to set the length of this, or the value for I should say, to input.length minus 1. Remember, when that's what you're doing, that's it. We're going from right to left here, so we're going to be decrementing. Okay, and this is going to look very similar to this initial for loop. Except for output at I, we're actually going to set this line of code is going to be slightly different. This time we need to multiply it times itself and that value, because recall, we are taking the product of everything from n to I plus 1, calculating that product. then we're multiplying that product by the existing value at output I. So that's what we're doing right here, multiplying the existing value at output I by value. And then we need to continue to update the value with the product of everything to the right. So that's input at I. And again, recall that I is the furthest value to the right. And then we need to return this. Okay, I think this will work. So now let's just go ahead and walk through this, what this is going to look like once it actually runs. And let's keep track of our output array right here. The first go through. All right, let's do that. So I equals 0. So this is 1. So value is equal to 1. The first value in our output array is 1. Now let's keep track of our value here as well. And value is equal to value times input at I. Well, input at I is 2. So this is 1 times 2. Therefore, this is 2. So here, I is equal to 1. And we need to set that equal to value. Value is 2. So we add 2 to our output array. Now we take value times input at I. Input at I is 3. So 2 times 3. So this becomes 6. Now we need to add 6 here. Next, we take the value, which is 6, and we multiply it. Now I is equal to 2. So we're right here in the input array. So we take 6 times 4, that's 24. And we add 24 to our output array. And now you'll notice we have 4 values in here, same number in our input, so we actually break out of this for loop. We don't even update this with 24 times 5. And you'll see why in just a second, why that is. So we've got our output array as is right now as 1, 2, 6, 24. Okay, on to the next for loop. And during this, I'm going to reference this and this a couple of times. So I'm going to leave those there, but I'm going to get rid of this because we really don't need this now. All right, so let's do the same thing here and just keep track of our output array. So now output at I is going to be the last value in the output array, which is 24. So we take 24 and we multiply that by value, which is 1. So we're filling this in from right to left. So to illustrate that, I'm going to put the values over here as we add them. That's 24. That's going to be the last value in output. Now, you'll see why that, and hopefully that makes sense now, because this value should be 4 times 3 times 2, which is 24. And we multiply that by 1 so that it stays consistent. So it's 24. So right now we're not using 5. Now we update the value of value, and we take it times input at I. Well, input at I is 5, right? So right now value is equal to 5. Okay, next one. We take output at I, the existing value at output at I, which is now 6, and we multiply that by 5. So the next value, which will be the second to last value, is going to be 30. Now we need to update this. So value equals 5 times, right here, times input at I, which is 4. This is going to be 20. All right, next we take output at I, which is going to be this right here, 2 times 20, so 40 is what's going to go next. All right, now we need to update this. So this is 20, and we multiply this by 3. So this is going to become 60. Next, we take output at I, which is going to be this right here, and we multiply that by 60. All right, so 1 times 60, that's 60, of course. And then it doesn't matter what happens now, because we've got our entire output array and what it should be: 60, 40, 30, 24. And let's just check that before we run the program and see if it looks right. So here we have what should be 4 times 3 times 2, that's 24. So you can see in our output array we've got 24 as the last value, because we need to multiply 4 times 3 times 2 and exclude 5. Now for this value, which corresponds with this right here in our output array, we need 5 times 3 times 2. That's 30 right there. Next, corresponding with this, we need 5 times 4 times 2. That's 40. There you see 40. And finally here, for this value, this corresponds to this here. You have 5 times 4 times 3, which is 60. Okay, hopefully that clarifies things. Let's go ahead and test this. And we're doing this in an object-oriented way rather than just stick all of this code into our main method. It demonstrates you understand the structure of a Java class, and that if needed, you could go ahead and add another method. So we're going to instantiate our problem2 class. This will be created, and then we'll call our solution here. And this should print out exactly what you see right here. So let's try that. And you can see it does that. We get 60, 40, 30, 24. Let's just go ahead and test the values that were given to us by Daily Coding Problem. So we'll add the 1. And you can see we have the same thing except we add a 120. So 120, 60, 40, 30, 24, which is what we've got down here. And why not? We'll just do 3, 2, 1 also and make sure that is what we expect. So we enter 3, 2, 1 and we get back 2, 3, 6, which is what we expect. Okay, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll answer them. I'll be doing problem 3 next, so be on the lookout for that. All right, stay hard, guys.